There is a pattern many people don't talk about, not openly, because it's frustrating. You work hard, you try to stay consistent, you pray, you believe something will shift, but every month it feels the same. Money comes in and then it goes out just as quickly. Unexpected expenses appear, plans get delayed, opportunities don't last, and you start asking yourself, why does this keep repeating? Not once, not occasionally, but every single month. I've seen this pattern before, not from the outside, but from a place where cycles like this were understood in a very specific way. Because when I was on the other side, we didn't focus on one, time problems. We focused on repetition, cycles, patterns that repeat so consistently. They begin to feel normal. Now, here's what most people don't realize. Poverty is not always about lack of effort. It's often about repeated patterns that never get interrupted. Small decisions, repeated thoughts, consistent reactions, all adding up month after month. Now, this is important because many people pray, but they pray the same way every time, with the same thoughts, the same focus, the same internal position. And because of that, nothing changes. Now understand this clearly. If your pattern stays the same, your results will repeat the same way. So today, I'm going to show you 4 prayers, but not in the way you've heard them before, not as something you repeat mechanically, but as specific points of interruption, moments where you break the pattern before it continues again. Because once you learn how to interrupt the cycle, you don't just pray for change, you create space for it. And that's where everything begins to shift. Now, this is where the cycle actually begins, not at the end of the month when money is already gone, but at the start when everything still looks normal. When I was on the other side, this was the moment we watched closely because the beginning of the month carries a specific mindset, relief, expectation, a sense that this time will be different. But at the same time, the same habits are still there, the same decisions, the same reactions, the same lack of awareness. And because nothing internally changes, the same pattern quietly starts again. Now, here's what most people do: they receive money and they move quickly. They spend without full awareness. They make decisions automatically. They follow the same routine they followed last month. And in doing that, they restart the cycle without even noticing it. Now, this is where the first prayer comes in, not at the end, not when things feel tight, but at the very beginning, when you still have control. Now, this prayer is not about asking for more, it's about clarity and control over your decisions. Because if your decisions don't change, your outcome won't change. So at the start of the month, you pause before spending, before planning, before reacting, and you set your focus. You say in your own words, let my decisions this month be clear, intentional, and different from what kept me stuck before. Now understand this clearly. This is not about the words themselves. It's about the awareness you bring into your actions after. Because this prayer is meant to interrupt autopilot, to stop you from moving the same way again. Now, here's the key: you don't rush after this. You slow down your decisions, even slightly, because slowing down creates awareness, and awareness changes patterns. Now, when you do this consistently, something shifts. You notice things you didn't notice before. You pause where you used to rush. You avoid small decisions that used to repeat. Not perfectly, but enough to change direction. Now, this is the first break in the cycle. At the beginning, before the pattern has time to build again. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the second prayer because even if you start strong, there is a specific moment in the middle of the month where most people lose control again. And if you don't catch it, the cycle continues the same. Now, this is the moment most people don't notice, but it's where the pattern quietly takes over again. The middle of the month. When I was on the other side, this was one of the most predictable points in the cycle because by this time, the initial awareness is gone. That careful thinking at the beginning, it starts to fade. The intention to do things differently, it becomes weaker, and slowly you drift back into automatic behavior. Now, this is what happens. You become less attentive. You stop tracking your decisions closely. You begin reacting instead of choosing. Not all at once, but gradually, and because it feels normal. You don't question it. Now, here's the key. The cycle doesn't break in one moment. It breaks in how you respond repeatedly. And the middle of the month is where most people stop responding intentionally. Now, this is where the second prayer comes in. Not when things are already out of control, but right when you feel that shift. That moment when you notice, I'm not as focused as I was before. Now, instead of ignoring it, you interrupt it, you pause again, and you bring your attention back. You say in your own words, let me stay aware. Let me not drift back into the same pattern. Now understand this clearly. This is not about fear. It's about recognizing the moment where you start losing control and correcting it immediately because drift is subtle. You don't feel it strongly. You don't notice it right away. But over time, it changes everything. Now, here's the shift. You stop letting the middle of the month be passive. You make it active. You check yourself. You realign your decisions. You bring your awareness back to what you're doing, even in small ways. Now, when you do this, something changes. The pattern doesn't build the same way. The small mistakes don't repeat as easily. Your direction stays more consistent. Not perfectly, but enough to make a difference. Now, this is the second interruption, right in the middle, where most people lose it. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the third prayer because as the month comes closer to the end, there is a pressure point that causes most people to panic and undo everything they've done. And if you don't handle that moment correctly, the cycle resets again. Now, this is the most intense part of the cycle, the end of the month. When I was on the other side, this was the moment we relied on the most, because this is where pressure builds. You look at what's left, you think about what's still due, you start calculating, adjusting, worrying, and suddenly, your decisions are no longer calm. They are driven by urgency. Now understand this clearly. Pressure changes how you think. It makes you react faster. It makes you choose quickly. It makes you focus on immediate relief instead of long-term direction. And in that state, you repeat the same mistakes. Now, here's what most people do. They panic slightly. They try to fix everything at once. They make rushed decisions just to get through the moment. And in doing that, they undo the awareness they built earlier in the month. Now the cycle completes itself again. Now this is where the third prayer comes in. Not when everything is calm, but right in the middle of that pressure, when you feel the urgency rising. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause, even for a moment, and you reset your focus. You say, in your own words, let me not act from pressure. Let me stay clear and controlled in this moment. Now, this is important because this prayer is not about removing the situation. It's about changing how you respond to it. Because your response in pressure determines everything. Now, here's the shift. You slow down your reaction, even slightly. You don't make decisions from panic. You give yourself space to think clearly, because clarity in pressure is what breaks the cycle. Now, when you do this consistently, something changes. You stop making rushed decisions. You avoid unnecessary mistakes. You carry your awareness all the way to the end of the month. Not perfectly, but differently and different, is what creates change. Now, this is the third interruption. At the moment of highest pressure, where most people lose control. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the fourth and final prayer, because even after the month ends, there is one last pattern that resets everything again if you don't catch it. And once you understand it, you won't start the next month the same way again. Now, this is the part almost no one pays attention to. But it's the reason the cycle keeps repeating. What happens after the month ends? When I was on the other side, this was one of the most overlooked, but most powerful moments. Because this is where everything either resets or shifts. Now think about this. The month ends, you look back. Maybe things went the same way. Maybe a few things changed, but not enough. And instead of stopping to reflect, you move on quickly. You tell yourself, next month will be better, but you don't actually change anything. Now understand this clearly. Hope without reflection repeats the same pattern, because if you don't see what happened, you will repeat it without realizing. Now this is where the fourth prayer comes in. Not at the beginning, not in the middle, not under pressure, but at the end, before the next cycle begins. Now this prayer is different. It's not about asking, it's about awareness and correction. You pause, you look back honestly. Where did you lose focus? Where did you act on impulse? Where did you drift? Not to judge yourself, but to understand your pattern. And then you say, in your own words, show me what I missed and help me not carry the same pattern into the next cycle. Now, this is important because this moment creates clarity, and clarity prevents repetition. Now, here's the shift. You don't rush into the next month blindly. You enter it with awareness. You know where to be careful. You know where you usually drift. You know where pressure affects you. And because of that, you respond differently. Now, when you do this consistently, something changes. The cycle doesn't reset the same way. You don't repeat the same mistakes automatically. You carry awareness forward instead of starting over. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Now, this is the fourth and final interruption. At the end, before everything starts again. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to show you how all four of these connect, because this is not about separate prayers. It's about building a pattern that replaces the old one completely. And once that happens, the cycle doesn't control you anymore. Now, this is where everything connects, because these four prayers are not separate actions. They are points of interruption across the entire cycle. When I was on the other side, this was the real focus. Not stopping someone once, but allowing the pattern to continue without interruption. Because if a pattern runs from beginning to end without being challenged, it repeats automatically. Now look at it clearly. At the start of the month, people move on autopilot. In the middle, they drift without noticing. At the end, they react under pressure. Afterward, they reset without reflection. And because each of these moments goes unchecked, the cycle completes itself again and again. Now, this is the key. You don't break a cycle in one moment. You break it by interrupting it at every stage. That's what these four prayers are doing. They are not just words, they are checkpoints of awareness. Now understand this clearly. The first prayer creates clarity at the beginning. The second restores awareness in the middle. The third stabilizes you under pressure. The fourth brings reflection before restarting. Together, they cover the entire cycle. Now, here's what happens when you apply all four consistently. The pattern doesn't run smoothly anymore. It gets interrupted at multiple points. Now, instead of moving automatically, you become aware at key moments, and awareness changes your decisions. Now, your decisions begin to shift, not drastically, but enough. You pause where you used to rush. You notice where you used to ignore. You respond where you used to react. And those small changes start creating different outcomes. Now, this is important because most people are waiting for a big breakthrough. But what actually changes things is consistent interruption of the same pattern. Now, here's the shift. You stop expecting one moment to fix everything, and you start managing the entire cycle, step by step, stage by stage, because control over the cycle is what creates stability. Now, when stability builds, your results begin to change, not randomly, but consistently. Now, in the final chapter, I'm going to show you how to lock this in, because once you understand the full pattern, you need to make sure it becomes your natural way of responding. And once that happens, the cycle no longer controls your outcome. Now, this is the final step, because understanding the pattern is not enough. Applying it once is not enough. If you don't make this consistent, the old cycle will return. When I was on the other side, this is what we depended on the most. Not that people wouldn't learn something new, but that they wouldn't maintain it long enough for it to become their default. They would start strong. They would become aware for a few days. They would interrupt the pattern once or twice. And then slowly, they would stop. They would go back to automatic decisions, back to drifting in the middle of the month, back to reacting under pressure, back to restarting without reflection. And within a short time, everything looked the same again. Now, this is the truth. What you don't maintain will not remain. So, this final step is about one thing: consistency. Now, here's the shift. You don't treat these four prayers as something temporary. You treat them as a system you follow every month. At the beginning, you pause and set clarity. In the middle, you check and realign. At the end, you slow down and stay controlled. Afterward, you reflect before restarting. Not occasionally, but every cycle. Now, this is important. At first, it will feel intentional. You will have to remind yourself. You will have to catch yourself slipping. But over time, something changes. You don't have to think about it as much. You naturally pause before decisions. You naturally stay aware in the middle. You naturally handle pressure with more control. You naturally reflect before moving forward. Because it becomes your default. Now, here's what happens when that shift occurs. The cycle no longer runs automatically. You are no longer reacting to it. You are managing it. Now your decisions become more consistent. Your awareness stays active. Your direction becomes stable. And stability is what creates lasting change. Not one good month, not one temporary improvement, but a different pattern entirely. Now, this is the final truth. You don't break poverty with one action. You break it by changing the pattern that repeats every month. And once that pattern changes, your results follow. So don't go back to doing this once and forgetting it. Don't allow the old cycle to rebuild quietly. Stay consistent. Stay aware. Because once this becomes your default, the pattern that used to control you will no longer exist the same way. And that is where real change begins.